I mentioned a while ago that it may be worth going into the problems of the Dragon Ball Z anime's Garlic Jr. arc. And here we are. Practically the entire fanbase is united in the thought of it being the bad part of the anime. But either apathy or frustration make it difficult for men to verbalize why it's bad, which is where this video comes in. First, I'll go over the small amount of good elements to it. The premise of filling in the gap within the Frieza and Cell arc interlude was one of the most obvious spots for filler. And it allowed for Goku to not take the spotlight away from any of the characters. The lore provided towards demons in the series also helps reiterate that demonic nature isn't tied down to a specific species, along with the science fiction elements now integral to the series also adding further parallels between Piccolo and Garlic Jr. On the subject of such ties, we also have Kami taking a proactive role for the only time in the Z anime outside of the film this is the direct sequel to. And the effects the Machiol world provides to its natives also allows for the extreme power-up of its returning threat to have a more coherent basis than "I just performed Shugyo really hard." Maron also works well as a commentary of those less familiar with the lore or culture of the series, which makes it surprising she's hated by the majority of the English native fandom, who got into this without experiencing much of the original Dragon Ball anime first. And Yamcha not rejecting her flirts adds surprisingly good build-up to Buruma viewing him as unfaithful enough to break up with him months later. Unfortunately, that's about as far as the good points go, and even those aren't done perfectly. Going back to the supporting cast getting their time to shine, such a premise as tackling the threat without Goku or Vegeta instead amounts to Gohan and Piccolo being the only relevant characters with some input from Kuririn. Whereas Yamcha gets sidelined early on, and Tenshinhan and Chaozu being absent entirely despite how brainwashed versions of them could have at least served as a minor distraction, or even a genuine threat with how much the others got amped up by the Aqua Mist. On the subject of character utilization, the four monarchs serving Garlic Jr. were one-dimensional enough that the only valid purpose for their existence would have been to give a win to Kuririn, or maybe the other Earthlings if they'd played the part in the third act, but all of them get wiped out by Gohan, which I'll get back to soon. With Kuririn's performance against them and Garlic Jr. being an inconsistent display of him getting ragdolled by Zol Dentado, to putting up a fight against Super Vinegar, and then even pressuring Super Garlic Jr. a little. There's also a few other power scaling issues, such as Kami being able to put up a fight against this new Garlic Jr., but that's fairly minor compared to the bigger issues at hand. Perhaps the most obvious plot hole riddled issue with the arc's conception is it being a direct sequel to a film that clearly cannot fit into the main continuity, as Kuririn in the film was familiar with Gohan despite the events with Raditz having not occurred yet, and Goku becoming aware of Gohan's latent power. Not only does this make the audience have to view a film of a completely different continuity as required viewing to understand who Garlic Jr. is, but all this could have been cleaned up by having Garlic Jr. rewritten to implement him into the main continuity, much as Super would do for Broly. Sticking on haphazardly merging continuities, there's also Hyad Dragon being present, despite being introduced in the third DBZ film, and pointlessly raises more questions than answers, when it's not as if he was implemented properly thereafter. Sticking on the subject of pure plot holes, there's a few surrounding Piccolo. There's him being immune to the Aqua Mist bite and fooling Garlic Jr., which is never properly explained when there's plenty of explanations that could have been given, such as it not working on the Mechians, or his Mazoku background giving him immunity to more lowly demonic arts. What's more is that his and Kuririn's eyes still turn the pink colour of those possessed, so what? Did he cast an illusion on himself and Kuririn? It also wasn't a great plan with the four monarchs proving a danger to Gohan, so this plan would have made far more sense if he'd wiped out those four before letting Yamcha bite him. The bigger issues though come in the fight against Garlic Jr., when he utilizes a powered up state to answer Garlic Jr.'s giant form, that seems to boost his strength and not hinder his speed, which, due to being filler, obviously never played a part before or after, and raises so many questions. Gohan and Piccolo getting the spotlight, and Piccolo having a new form obviously makes it comparable to something else, but more on that later. The most blatantly asinine thing with Piccolo in this arc, though, is him being hindered by the lifelink between he and Kami, which has never been a thing before. Kami was even perfectly fine in the previous arc when Piccolo was close to bleeding out. Even assuming it was due to Kami being within the Shinsenkai, and that having different properties, that just raises more questions with no answer to what is and isn't applicable to cause this. Going on the subject of its handling of characters, its protagonist in Gohan is handled very inconsistent when it comes to his enraged self swiftly killing each of the four monarchs when angry. Gohan had already killed before at this point, but that one instance was when faced with someone who destroyed his way home on Namek, and killing so callously makes his character change when wiping out the Cell Juniors redundant for the anime. Also, his emotional conflict at the end of not wanting to lower the barrier for a few seconds to destroy the Machior world seems an unnecessary way to pad out the episode when Kami and Popo were seeming to hang on fine without it. Having him ponder on the sentient life that may be on the planet, and how his kill or be killed attitude would make him no different from his Saiyan ancestors or Frieza, could have been added as a more valid reason for this doubt. But, unfortunately, nuance is more missing from this arc than Goku is. On the subject of later events being redundant, Kuririn getting the girlfriend does make the extent he went through from the slight affection 18 showed for him not be as understandable, when significantly less down bad. Then again, it wasn't suggested he and Maron did much, and she did show herself to be unfaithful, so maybe an absolute waste of a relationship was just as debilitating for Kuririn's priorities as none at all. Also, how did he afford that car and suit when he doesn't have a job at that point? Did he decide to do some milk deliveries on Shugyo Island to pay for it? Maybe that's how Kame Sennin can avoid his large magazine collection and TV license. Or maybe DBZ Abridged was onto something. Perhaps the most disappointing character writing in the arc, though, is for its titular villain. Garlic Jr.'s film self was one of the more engaging villains in him getting down to business of achieving immortality first, and then bothering with fighting after it, as well as having a stronger motivation than most in wanting revenge for his father. Here, his motive of wanting to revive his father is good at first, but then just gets abandoned for no real reason, which makes that goal seem disingenuous. What cements him as the worst antagonist of a story arc in the franchise, aside from maybe Dragon Ball Heroes, I have no interest in that, is how he's so stupid as to make the same mistake twice, in opening the dead zone and getting trapped in it again, when all he needed to do to win was just keep taking attacks from his enemies and regenerating, while they're wearing themselves down. As much as I've criticised Zamasu in his story arc, at least he understood that immortality is an automatic win against those using brute force, and a literal deus ex machina was required to defeat him, as opposed to Garlic Jr. assuring his own defeat. There's plenty more I could levy against the arc if going over every minor issue that add up, such as Karin simping for Maron in being willing to give her the bell to the heavenly realm being inconsistent for someone meant to be far more sagely than Kame Sennin, or the Lytians certainly not being as short as they should be, but going full Mauler on this arc is unnecessary when its final episode practically even says it might as well have been a fever dream. It says a lot when even its brief version in Budokai Tenkaichi 2 has more coherent storytelling than it, with it removing unnecessary characters, avoiding blatant plot holes, and even fixing Garlic Jr.'s implementation into the anime's main continuity, with it being Goku who sealed him in an alternate version of the film. As many issues as the superhero film had when it came to plot holes, contrivances, and a disappointing villain, it at least progressed Gohan and Piccolo's characters along with their plot relevance, and allowed for the supporting cast to play a true supporting role, unlike here. The Garlic Jr. arc may not do as much damage to the overarching story as parts of the franchise such as episodes of Bardock, most of Super's arcs, or even other filler segments in the Z anime, but it is the most worthless in that nothing of value would be lost if it was erased from existence, making it stand as a unanimously agreed low point for the franchise. Thank you for listening to all of this rant. Subscribe for more Dragon Ball videos in the future, watch this playlist of what ones I've done thus far, and I'll see you later.